City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded September 11, 2023.
We'll call this to order, our meeting of the Finance Committee, September 11th. It's 6:33.
Yes.
Corey, if you take roll, please.
Yes. Christensen.
Here.
Morrow.
Here.
Shore.
Here.
Shuda.
Here.
All right, 4 present.
All right, thank you. Tonight, to start with, we have a non-action item, presentation of the proposed 2024 capital budget. Corey, take it away.
All right, well, thank you. So it's that time of year again in budget season. So tonight we're going to talk about the capital budget. Basically, I broke this presentation into 3 general parts. First, we'll start with an overview and discussion of some of the challenges that we have with capital budgeting and some of the challenges that we ran into this year. And then we'll also talk about the 2024 capital projects in terms of what's proposed for 2024. And then getting into a long-term plan and basically talking about what we do long-term with capital, since we do have some challenges. So if I can, okay. So first of all, where we are in the process, September Finance is our initial presentation, so it's a chance to ask any questions, express any initial concerns. We're not looking for formal action tonight. We'll be looking for formal action in October, so the goal is to present it to get everyone kind of comfortable with what it is, and then you have a month to basically ask questions of either myself or the various departments to get more information. And then October, we'd be looking for formal approval, and then that would be incorporated into the budget for November. And one thing to note on that is typically once we're approved in October, we do like to be able to get things ordered. So even though the final budget hasn't been approved yet, that's a request that came from, the department heads in more recent times with supply chain issues and everything. They need a little bit more time in order to get orders in. So that's why we have that request that, okay, once we're approved in October, hopefully everyone's capital projects are approved and they can go ahead and pull the trigger and get started on those. So moving on to just some general overview, basic information, what determines the size of our capital budget. Traditionally, basically, we've focused on the amount of debt principal that we're repaying, because that makes room for the new borrowing. The idea is that we're not going to increase our debt outstanding. So when we tie our new borrowing to what we're repaying in principal, we're able to keep that debt level stable. And then plus the amount of fund balance that we're utilizing. The goal is also to keep fund balance relatively stable. Typically we have about $1 million worth of fund balance to put into the capital budget, which is great, and that the source of that really is departments underspending their budgets, or if we have revenues that come in higher than expected. And then in recent years, we've also had some other sources of funding that have really boosted up the size of the capital budget. One is the American Rescue Plan Act, the stimulus money. We got $2.7 million with that, and that was a key component of last year's capital budget. And then we've also had TIF repayments in the past 2 that have also added to the size of our capital budget. The goal is financial stability, though, or financial sustainability. The ability to have something where it's financially balanced and it can continue for the long term. So getting into that, what is sustainability? So I looked up just a few definitions on sustainability from dictionary.com. The ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, or confirmed, basically the ability to continue. Environmental science, the quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources, supporting long-term ecological balance. And then the last definition is from the United Nations, and I really liked this definition, and it's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that absolutely does relate to finance because basically what we need to do financially is we need to chart a course that's financially sustainable over the long term. Something that we can continue for 100 years without negative consequences, and that means that hopefully we're not drawing down fund balance, and that we're not, depleting our debt capacity excessively, and loading up on debt. Something that we can continue, and most importantly, that does not compromise the ability of future generations or people who are in our positions in the future to meet their own needs of the time. So our journey to financial sustainability and capital project funding, it's been a long journey, and there's been a couple of twists and turns along the way, but basically from 2007 to 2013, the city debt increased from $8.3 million to over $35 million. It had basically quadrupled. So at that time in 2013, now that's also, I took over my position in 2013, and one of the first things that I noticed was that this was not a sustainable path as far as the amount of money that we were borrowing. So that's when we decided to tie the size of new capital borrowing to what we were repaying in principal every year, and that did stop those yearly increases. We were able to really turn that around and make a lot of progress on that. But started to realize that we were not really sustainable in another way, and that's, so in 2016 we did a comprehensive analysis of our capital needs, and we looked at things like road construction, and we identified that we were doing half a mile of street reconstruct a year, and we have 143 miles of road, so that was on a 286-year replacement cycle. And utilities last for a long time, but they don't last for 286 years. So we had a hard conversation about that to say, we need to change this. We need more money for capital to have a more sustainable replacement cycle. So what we did is we increased the size of our capital budget by $1.6 million, effective in 2018. The analysis that we did at that time indicated that that was sufficient, and we did a very comprehensive analysis on that in terms of every capital asset that the city has. And we thought that we had it, that we had the perfect balance. We've got, the new borrowing tied to what we're repaying in principal.
Good days.
Those were good days. Aldershore remembers those days, and those were some good days. And it was just a great feeling. And then in 2020, we identified that construction costs had just gone crazy, and that what we had initially worked on in 2016, those prices that was based on in terms of the replacement costs, reconstruction and resurfacing costs, that those had escalated, and therefore we were again out of balance and not really in a sustainable position, that we had, due to the increased costs, fallen behind on that targeted mileage, and we were still better off than where we were before, though. So the target, for instance, for street reconstructs is about 1.6 miles a year. Like I said, it used to be half a mile. In 2020, it was about 1.2 miles. So we were a little bit short, but we were still better than where we were before. So July of 2020, we discussed some options with the council, with the finance committee. We were all on Zoom at that time during, the height of COVID lockdowns, and discussed options in terms of where we wanted to go with, if we wanted to close that gap, but it was pretty close to when we had already done a fairly significant increase. It was following a revaluation that had been done a few years prior. It was also following a school referendum that had increased property taxes. So at that time, the discussion resulted in a targeted property tax levy increase of 2.5% annually, which allowed for a little bit of an adjustment for inflation, but wasn't really enough to close the gap. So then, fast forward to 2021 and 2023, inflation has accelerated, and our discussion in 2020, we kind of talked about, well, with COVID, our price is going to come back down. Are we going to have an economic recession? Are things going to change? And unfortunately, things didn't really change. They kept going in that direction, and if anything, inflation accelerated, and it spread beyond road construction to include fleet vehicles and equipment, building repairs and maintenance. Now, the lucky thing that we had for 2022 and 2023 was the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Like I said, that was $2.7 million, which helped to close some of those gaps. So a few examples of just kind of the sort of inflation that we've experienced. Garbage trucks, our 2017 price on that, $214,000. 2024 price, $379,000 each. 76% increase in 7 years. And the conundrum that we face specifically with fleet is that if you wait on replacing fleet vehicles when they're due for replacement, your maintenance costs will increase. So for instance, we have two 2018 garbage trucks that are 1 year younger than our 2017 garbage trucks. Those only had $28,000 in maintenance costs last year. Now you go with 1 year older, the 2017 purchase year, $64,000 in maintenance costs for two vehicles. So you can see that's a little bit over a $30,000 difference just for two garbage trucks. So the issue that we have there is, you know, if we don't replace our fleet vehicles, we start getting killed in the operating budget on those maintenance costs. More examples: a Ford F-250 pickup truck, 2013 price $23,000, 2023 price $46,000. A 99% increase in 10 years. A PD Squad Ford Explorer, 2018 price $36,000, 2023 price $48,000, 33% increase in 5 years. And we've been told to expect another 10% increase from Ford for 2024. So it appears that things continue to go in that direction. Getting into road construction costs, and that's the one that's really a killer. You can follow the complete reconstruction, where we reconstruct everything, the street, the utilities, you know, curb and gutter, the whole works. Our 2016 plan, we figured it was $200 per linear foot, and that was really based on 2016, 2015, 2014 prices. By 2020, that had risen to $277 a linear foot. For 2023, $411. So over the course of 7 years, you're looking at a 105% increase. Resurfacing, so that's where we just replace the blacktop on top and don't really touch the utilities underneath. 2016 plan, $102 per linear foot. 2020, that had risen to $190, and then 2023, $214. So almost 110% increase over the 7-year period. So certainly that has created problems for the size of our capital budget and what we're trying to do in terms of keeping up with our road construction needs. So what we had originally planned for 2024, because the ARPA money is gone for 2024, we spent the remainder of that for the 2023 capital budget. So basically last year, the budget was just under $9.4 million for capital, and that extra amount was because of that American Rescue Plan Act funding. That was planned to go down to about $7.5 million for 2024, basically to go back down. And unfortunately, basically what I'm here to tell you is that we're not able to do that. I mean, we could do that. I don't want to say we absolutely can't, but we're afraid of the impact on the city from doing so, the impact on keeping up with our capital needs. Basically, for 2024, we had originally planned to borrow $6.2 million and use $1.3 million in fund balance. We had $15.2 million in requests for our $7.5 million target, and we were able to reduce that to just under $10 million. So we were able to cut $5.2 million out of the capital budget, and we just didn't feel that it was prudent to reduce that any further, just based on the requests that we have and the needs that we have. So basically what this means is we're kind of breaking one of my big rules that I've always had for the capital budget, which is to tie what we're borrowing to what we're repaying in principal. It means that we'll have to borrow more in 2024 than what we're repaying in principal. And I'm okay with doing that as long as we can establish a long-term plan to bring this back into balance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation here. So what we're proposing, basically this is our capital budgets from 2018 to 2024. Proposing a capital budget of just under $10 million. And where is that increase going? I think that's something that a lot of people probably want to know. So I compared the 2022 capital budget to the 2024 capital budget. The reason why I went with 2022 is because that's the last time that we had a capital budget that was $7-point-something million. So kind of just give you an idea of what's the difference between a $7-point-something million capital budget and a $10 million capital budget. And as you can see, the biggest change is in roads. You're looking at almost $1.5 million of that extra $2.5 million or so going to roads. So, and I think that one of the important things to note about that is that doing this, the road projects that we're pursuing for 2024 have been approved via referendum, and the referendum's passed by 77 and 78%. So that's one of the reasons why we were hesitant to not do those projects. Then the second biggest increase is in fleet, looking at about an extra $500,000 in fleet between 2022 and 2024. And then the rest of these, some of these ebb and flow. So you have more money for transit. They don't always replace buses every year, but this year they're coming, or for 2024, they're coming up for replacement. So you see that increasing. You see others going down. You see parks went down a little bit. General and IT went down a little bit. But basically, as far as where's the money going, it's roads and it's fleet is primarily where it's going. So as far as the sources of funding, we're looking at borrowing $8.5 million, and then we're looking at using just under $1.5 million in fund balance. So, and then as far as how the fund balance usage compares to history, basically it is a significant amount of fund balance that we're using. It is more than we've used in the past. Typically we've used about $1 million in fund balance. For 2023 we had kind of a bad budget year, so that's why we reduced that to $700,000 for 2023. For 2024 we actually are having a good year. We're especially doing really well with interest revenue just based on the current interest rate environment. So we do feel confident that we can responsibly use that much fund balance and keep it relatively stable. So then getting into the capital budget size versus the requests. So like I said before, we had $15.2 million in requests. We brought that down to just under $10 million. Reduced it by $5.2 million. But as happens every year, and I always like to point this out, is we do delay some projects where they're requested for 2024 and we might have moved them to 2025 or 2026. And that's all in the notes on your on the capital budget spreadsheets, by the way, as far as what we moved to what years. And so as you can see, we were able to get that number reduced, but it also impacted future years, where now we have more slated for future years as we've had to push those back. And I also graphed that out. Sometimes it's easier to look at it in graph form so you can kind of see how some of those 2024 requests were moved to 2025 and 2026. And you can see that even if we keep a roughly $10 million capital budget and adjust it for inflation by about 3% per year, you're still seeing the requests far exceeding what we have available in capital funding. So certainly, it appears that we legitimately can use that $10 million capital budget. So then going into the next slide, reading the capital sheet, so I did want to provide a guide to just the general columns. I believe I also covered that in my memo, so I don't want to read those all to you, but it's there in case you're ever confused about what the columns mean. So moving on to the actual capital projects. So we'll go through this here. First, citywide. We always budget $50,000 a year for citywide building maintenance. That's an annual item to cover whatever comes up. If we have a furnace that goes out, we have a hot water heater that goes out, or whatever happens, we have that money to cover whatever needs come up citywide. Information technology. $60,000 for computer lifecycle replacements, $25,000 for server upgrades, and $15,000 for expanded data storage for the police department. Moving on to the airport, $42,000 for a mower, and that's just a usual replacement cycle, kind of an issue. Transit, $315,000 for bus purchases. That's actually only 20% of the cost for transit. The federal government pays 80%, we pay 20%, so that's our 20% share of 3 buses. Moving on to Department of Public Works Engineering other, so other than road construction and fleet. We've got a streets garage roof that needs to be replaced. That's $264,000. $130,000 for traffic signal improvements. That's an annual item. We do traffic signals, like everything else that we have a useful life, and they expire, so we need to continue to replace those. $90,000 for sidewalk improvements, and that's now an annual item now that we no longer special assess for that. That's something that we include in the annual capital budget. Road construction, I already kind of mentioned this about the 2 different types between complete reconstructs or just doing a resurfacing. So we've got both complete reconstructions and resurfacing planned. If we go on, so $3.1 million for a complete reconstruction of Maria, Walker, and Vincent on the north side. Now that's just the city portion, doesn't include the utilities underneath, so because those are paid with ratepayer dollars, not with city capital project fund dollars. The number of miles there is 1.16 miles, so our target is 1.59 miles. We're about 73% of the target. So even with proposing a capital budget that's higher than we would like and higher than we were originally targeting, we still are a little bit short of that targeting for street reconstruction. And we've got $1.2 million for resurfacing. That's the area near the water department, Bliss, Prairie, Cook, and Mason, and that's 0.74 miles. We also budget $750,000 every year for road surface improvements, which includes chip sealing, some other things that come up. Sometimes the fall paving project can come out of that. And then $415,000 for Country Club Drive. This is actually the Town Hall portion of Country Club Drive. We do have an agreement with the Town Hall that basically the city pays 70% of the costs for that portion. The town pays 30%, so that's our portion, and I realize that it's a little unique. It's an agreement that's been in place since the mid-1980s, and there were definitely some unique circumstances on how the city got there, but it's unfortunately it's a perpetual agreement that we are obligated to, which that's 0.32 miles, so that would bring us to 67% of our target. Although it's not in the city, I think it still gives you an idea of, okay, what are we able to do every year with the current capital budget that we have, and then $15,000 for West Zinda Bridge rehab design. So going to the next slide, you can see our road construction budgets from 2018 to 2024. You can see we've made quite a bit of progress, in terms of our road construction budgets. Just a slight drop from 2023, but not significant. And, it really shows that the city has really made a strong effort to budget more for road construction, because it is a complaint that we've heard from a lot of people that our roads are not in the condition that we would like them. And unfortunately, The problem is, part of the problem is that the goalpost keeps moving in terms of construction prices, and this just gets more and more expensive, which is why our road construction, is still not quite where we would like it to be. And then also have some Business 51 items. Wanted to separate those out from our regular road construction projects. So we've got $2 million for designing the south segment of Business 51, and this will be paid for with a mix of both the Business 51 funds that we have on hand that are already set aside for Business 51 and TIF 12. And TIF 12 is the south side TIF, and I do want to note that this will require a transfer from TIF 5 or the north side TIF in order to fund the TIF share of that. And then $1.5 million for the north side Business 51 design and real estate acquisition, and that would be paid for with funds from TIF 5. So if you look at your capital sheet, it's in the column that's funded by other sources. It's not funded by borrowing or fund balance. There's separate pots of money for it. Moving on to fleet vehicles and equipment. So we've got $758,000 for garbage trucks. That was already approved by the Finance Committee due to a need to order in advance. $451,000 for pickups and vans for the Parks Department. $306,000 for Police Department squads. $246,000 for pickups and vans for Streets Department, $153,000 for fire squads, which would be the vehicles for the fire department officers, like the chief, the fire marshal, $120,000 for police undercover vehicles, $110,000 for a chipper truck, $63,000 for a one-ton flatbed, and $28,500 for mowers for the Parks Department. Yep.
I'm going to try and go fishing for just a glimmer of, light. So trying to get ahead of, with vehicle prices rising, trying to jump on that, buy promptly. You mentioned that we aren't always purchasing buses for transit. What I'm fishing for is, do these pressures let up with all the purchases that we're committing to making up front here? Do we have out years where those costs really let up for a little bit because our vehicle fleets got younger, he said, hopefully?
So I know that the Streets Department does try to balance this out in terms of how much they're requesting for fleet vehicles and equipment. So
it's numerous. It's several departments.
Yeah, there's a lot of fleet vehicles and equipment. Why don't I get back to you on that, because I know that the Streets Department and fleet, they do keep a good plan of long-term how they expect things to go with fleet vehicles and equipment. One thing that I can tell you is that there were some items in fleet that we actually did push to future years. So, so unfortunately, this isn't even like, it's not like we took a year and we said we are going to satisfy every single need that we have for fleet. I wish I could tell you that, and we're not going to have to deal with this again. But unfortunately, there were even fleet vehicles that we had to push off and not do. So, but I'll try to get you a more comprehensive answer on that. Okay, and then moving on to the fire department, $151,000 to replace the Station 2 roof. The total cost is actually $220,000, but we have $69,000 left over from the Station 1 roof project, $50,000 for turnout gear, $30,000 for communications equipment, radios and lapel mics, $23,000 for general fire equipment, $17,000 for technical rescue equipment, and $15,000 for fire hoses and nozzles. And then the Parks Department, We've got $390,000 for the Graholski Park Phase 1 construction. As some of you might know, this is actually a new park that the city is developing. And then we've got $85,000 for a Willett air handling unit, but that's paid for with the Willett Fund. Luckily, the Willett Fund was in a position where it could cover its 2 capital requests, and then also $10,000 for safety ladders for the Willett, which is also paid for by the Willett Fund. And then Police Department, $450,000 for a vehicle camera system and body camera system, $120,000 for tasers, and $37,500 for designing a garage for the Police Department and the Forestry Department. So the plan right now would be a combined garage for the 2 departments. So that's basically the capital projects that we're proposing for 2024. I realize it was kind of a lot to just sort of throw at you all at once, but of course the capital sheet is in your packet. And with that, I wanted to see if there's any questions on the 2024 capital projects before we move on to kind of the long-term planning part of this conversation.
Does the committee have any questions at this time? Anyone from the public? All right, Corey.
Okay.
Keep on going.
All right. So now we have the hard conversation about the long-term plan to bring capital back into balance. And basically what it comes down to is, unfortunately, the property tax levy. And basically what we need to do is bring this back into balance in terms of getting what we're paying off in principal every year to match how much new money we're borrowing for every year. So what is needed, and I think this is probably the bare minimum, is we've already made a decision for 2024 that we want to do a 0% increase. So the plans that I worked on would incorporate that, and the reason why we would do that 0% increase, again, is just because of the impact of the revaluation. People may already be experiencing some pretty significant adjustments. Then for 2025, wanted to keep this one reasonable as well in terms of a levy increase, so recommending 3.5%. And the reason why I'm trying to keep that somewhat reasonable is just because I figured the revaluation will still be pretty fresh even going into 2025 in terms of fresh in people's mind. And also we have some potential referendums from some other taxing jurisdictions that may also play a role. And then 2026 to 2030, 5.25%, which I don't like that number either, but I wanted to figure out how we could get this resolved by the end of the decade, or by 2030. And basically that would get us balanced by 2030. The assumption would be a 3% annual increase in the capital budget, and you can see the green line there is the amount of the new borrowing every year, and the purple line is the amount of the repayment. And you can see for 2030 then those two lines would match up, and then also along the bottom I labeled how the levy increases would go. One thing I do want to note is that when we're talking about borrowing and everything, this is just for our general capital projects, so we're also not including the impact of Business 51 or TIF projects or subdivision developments, which also, typically we've done that outside of the regular capital budget process, and that can also bump up our use of borrowing as well. Now, if you absolutely can't get on board with the 5.25%, I wanted to throw another option out there. So your other option is to go with, basically it'd be, again, 0% for 2024, 3.5% for 2025, and then 4.5% going forward. That'll extend it out to 2032. So basically, if we go with that, that'll get us balanced by the year 2032. And also keep in mind that, we're still probably reconstructing 1.2 miles per year during this time period when we really could be reconstructing 1.6 if we have a sustainable capital cycle. So it's certainly, I wish I had better news for you, but it is kind of tough. I'll be honest, I was sitting down with that Excel spreadsheet figuring this all out, and you wouldn't usually think of an accountant, using some, curse words with an Excel spreadsheet, but I was doing that when I figured this out and figured out what it all meant with our tax levy and how long it would take to get us back into balance. And then just one other option to provide you with is if we went with 3.5 instead of 4.5 for 2025.
4.5 instead of 3.5.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 4.5 instead of 3.5 for 2025. Then that would almost get us balanced by 2031, so it almost takes a year off of that. So that's if you are saying, 2032 is pretty long, maybe we can do a little bit more. That's just another option, is to phase in that 4.5% adjustment a little bit quicker. And then moving into the effects on debt capacity, because of course this will have an impact basically over the period of time. If I use the least aggressive option, which would be the, say, Plan 2032, you're looking at about a $12.7 million increase in debt over that 8 or 9 year period. And again, that doesn't include any of the extraordinary borrowing that might come up from TIF projects, subdivision development, or Business 51. So I did a comparison of how we sort of compare to other communities to say, okay, is it responsible to have that kind of an increase in our debt? And so I took Marshfield, Plover, Wausau, Wisconsin Rapids. And basically what I found is that what we've done over the last 10 years has legitimately put the city into a good position in terms of debt. So if I compare it per capita, basically Stevens Point would be the lowest of the five. So we have lower debt per capita than Plover, Marshfield, Wausau, or Wisconsin Rapids. I added the $12.7 million to see how does that affect the analysis, and you can see that even with that additional $12.7 million, obviously we're higher. We're not the lowest anymore, but we're still not the highest. We're about in the middle of the pack. And then the other way that we typically look at debt is debt to equalized value. So I did an analysis there, and again, we are the lowest of any of our comparables. So, that makes me proud of the work that we've done over the last 10 years to really keep that debt in line. And then moving on to the next slide, you can see that even with that $12.7 million increase, we still are, in the ballpark with our comparables, and we're not the highest. Now, of course, the big asterisk there is that doesn't include Business 51. It doesn't include some of the major TIF projects that we might do in the future. So there might still be some challenges long term, but doing this part of the analysis is one of the reasons why going through the capital budget process I was able to say, okay, I can loosen up a little bit on my demand that we tie, new borrowing to what we're repaying in principal every year, just because we do have a little bit of room to work with there. So, questions or discussion on that long-term plan?
Any questions from the committee first? Alder Shore?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, linking to repayment and principal probably is the responsible thing. Mm-hmm. So, loosening that too much, the curves, separate, and, what our peer communities are doing, I'm not sure matters in the end, right? Because it's kind of a get behind her and behind her. But what I wanted to take a moment on is we're sort of looking at this in isolation.
Okay.
And I want to bring in particularly how levy limits work and are playing in this, because I think that's an important context. So correct me if I get anything wrong. Levy limits, in essence, keep us from capturing the appreciation of the real estate in town, because the revaluation is within that equalized value. Am I right so far? Which means that the increase that people are feeling right now is because relative to what happened to the price of other homes, their appreciation was bigger. Correct so far?
Yes.
Right. And this is why the levy limits focus so much on net new construction, right? That's how you can grow your budget. Is again, it's stock that's being added rather than rising prices. So that's kind of full picture in terms of what's happening with people's tax bills. Now, if you live in your home, that's you haven't cashed that equity out, so you don't get it yet, and and that's the pressure. But the value of the asset did go up, so that's one piece of context. The more important one, I think, and I mentioned this before, is city taxes and state taxes, right? A lot of what we've lost on the revenue side is cost sharing from state taxes. And this, I think, kind of for the public awareness, this analysis, I think, maybe is worth doing, and seeing what I described before as, well, yeah, they get to be the good guys, right? The legislature gets to say, we're cutting your taxes, and we're holding the bag. So that's just, I think, another important part of the picture. I think it would be good to see is, kind of the sort of political shine of the tax cutting at that level. Some of that has come out of our hide and put us in this position. So I don't know, in case those are helpful.
Sure, yeah. And one thing with levy limits to always keep in mind is, so levy limits affects the operating budget. So it doesn't necessarily affect capital. So in other words, if we want to borrow more money and increase taxes to build a fire station, we can do that. But if we want to increase taxes to actually put the firefighters in the station, that's the operating budget, and that's the part that we can't do without going to referendum. So just, one thing that I want to make sure is understood is
that's the freedom on the borrowing side, because it's attached to the city's assets, value of what we own.
Yeah.
Capital budget is different.
Yeah, and certainly, if we wanted to be more aggressive in terms of how we phase in those tax levy adjustments, and I'm not saying that we need to be, but that would be a decision that would be under your purview. What I tried to do is I tried to be sensitive to sort of what's going on in the community and kind of what's going on out there in terms of the impact on the residents of being too aggressive with those levy increases. So,
any other comments from the committee? I guess I just would like to say, I think you've taken a good balanced approach, taking into account needs and wants. We're not able to get everything we want. We are hopefully being able to address the most important needs, and that has to be the focus. And I think we are being good stewards of the taxpayers' tax dollars. And so I do like the possibility, depending on what the other taxing entities do next year, if they don't have major increases, if they don't do because we are hearing that is a good possibility. If they don't, then I think we could consider that going to 4.5% right away that first year and cutting that year off the end. But that'll be a discussion for a year from now. We'll be able to see just what the lay of the land looks like at that point in time. But I think with what we know right now, I think what you've laid out is a pretty logical course of action. So nice job. Okay. Any comments from the public? Alder Kamer.
All right, thank you, Chair. I guess this is a question for the comptroller. In the past, you've pointed out to us, in terms of being mindful of how we finance things in the budget, of how it might affect the credit rating with Moody's. So I'm just wondering, given this sort of projected timeline, how, or if at all, you think this might affect our credit rating?
Sure, that's a great question, and certainly an increase in debt, would typically be considered a credit negative, where it doesn't really help us to increase the debt. However, I think that what we've laid out is it's a pretty modest increase. So, and we're already in a good place with our debt, so I can't give you 100%, they're going to downgrade us or not downgrade us, but I'm not overly concerned about it, just based on that it is a fairly modest increase. But of course, if you layer more things on top of it, one of the things that I'm working on to try to do is to not have huge debt increases in 1 year, right. Just because then I think that does really increase your chances. If it spikes up significantly in a particular year, then that definitely increases your chances of a downgrade. I'm hoping that by staying somewhat moderate with the debt increases, even though it is increasing, but hopefully it'll be modest enough where we'll keep Moody's happy. And then the other piece of that, and I talked about this quite a bit last month too, is kind of walking the line on fund balance as far as managing that appropriately. I think that really helps, because that's the other piece that they really look at. So if your debt increases a little bit, but you're doing well on your fund balance, that can kind of help pull you through that situation.
Right. Just want to mention too, like you mentioned earlier, we're not taking any action on this tonight. So if you have any other questions, any other thoughts and concerns, I know Corey's, I've met with him, and he's been very, very helpful in explaining things with me too. Alder Kneebone.
Mary Kneebone, District 7 Alder. I appreciate the fact, Chair Christensen, you brought up that we're not the only taxing entity. Mm-hmm. Speaking for those of us on fixed incomes, I would rather see us go 4.5 and stay at 4.5, mm-hmm. and maybe have that extra year on the end, okay, rather than go from 3 to 5. 5 is going to be, right. Because we aren't the only taxing entity, right. If we can keep that level, if it's not going to hurt us that much to go out an extra year, sure. For folks that are concerned about being taxed out of their houses, I think it would help.
I think what's being proposed isn't going to. He presented 5 initially, but then we went to 4.5% with 3.5% the first year. So I think. Yeah,
well, there was one 3.5.
The first year.
2.5.
No, then it went 3.5 and then 4.5 after that.
Anyway.
So yes. I guess, okay. Yeah. So, and what I wanted to do is give you a couple of different options.
Right.
So basically what I did was I gave you 3 different options in terms of how we can phase that in, depending on if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit less aggressive, and it's that fine balance, like you said, between, okay, meeting the needs of the city and, the property tax levy and what our citizens can afford. So, from my perspective, I'm fine with whatever option you would like to choose. So it sounds like you're thinking, okay, kind of that last option with going to 4.5% right away and then staying at 4.5%, and I'm fine with that option. It's good feedback to have. I think it's a good discussion to.
And I think the two options that'll be under consideration will be whether we go 4.5% all the way across, or just 3.5% that first year, next year, and then 4.5% after that, depending on what the other taxing entities do next year. If the other two entities, or three entities, one's not going to have much of a spike, we know, but the other two may, we may keep it a little bit less that first year in order to try to keep things more stable for the taxpayer. But I don't see us, I guess I don't foresee us going to 5 at any point in time. It'd either be 4.5 all the way across, or a 3.5 and then 4.5 from that. And there'd be about a difference of just a tiny bit more than a year difference, or a little bit less than a year, as we looked at it. But I think we'll have to, like you said, we need to be mindful of the other taxing entities as well. I think that's a good point, Alder Nebo. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, sir. Next, we have on our agenda the discussion and possible action, approval of an amendment to the contract with AECOM on the Business 51 design. I'm guessing
Director Badoon.
Director Badoon will probably be running up the hallway. Unless he's asleep. Oh.
I tried to capture everything that was in the memo, but I guess more so for questions. But I think, what it really kind of boils down to, we did ask them to do a few extra things. Part of it was just kind of, necessary. Otherwise, we felt to kind of get restarted before that. And then, of course, the council had otherwise asked for them to investigate their own notes more. And then the last part, as I kind of identified there, is just kind of the time. And because it really was no fault of AECOM's that things have kind of gotten delayed some, I think it is appropriate to ask for it. And I just want to clarify, I mean, they're only looking for any sort of increases related to any work that has yet to be completed. So anything that, of course, is done, we're not paying on top of things, it's just kind of a general something. It's the actual hours remaining there, and then just some additional time, because, of course, even when they're not doing something, there's still administrative costs that they have, as far as we still get their invoices and people are getting paid to do things. So I think it is reasonable for what it is. The breakdown is pretty straight across those various things that we're looking into there. So, but if there's any questions, I'll answer what I can.
First, do we have a motion to consider this item?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Morrow and second by Shore. Questions from the committee?
The only comment I have is this is kind of like what the county's going through with the courthouse. The longer we don't come to a consensus on this, the more money it's going to cost over and over again. I don't want to be like the county courthouse, which has gone up by 300% just in the time that I've been involved with that, from 30,000, from I think it was like 35 million now to like almost 200 million. And so if we could just come to a consensus on what we need to do so that these fees just don't keep so we keep paying for things, and we don't see any, and we don't see anything on the ground.
Alder Morrow, I'm in full agreement. Pausing things tends to become very costly. So I think we need to keep moving ahead and proceeding. So any other comments? Comments from the public? If not, we have a motion to approve the changing contract with AECOM. All in favor of that would signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed would be no. And that passes. Next on our agenda, we have the authorization for an Energy Future Grant.
Yeah, and I believe Adam Kuhn from the Community Development Department was supposed to cover this one, but basically...
He's here.
Oh, he's here?
I believe he's in the other, there he is.
Oh,
There he
okay.
is. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Could you give us a little background on our Energy Future Grant, please?
Yeah, so the city, along with about a dozen other communities here in the state, have been working together on finding some practical sustainability initiatives that we can all collaboratively work on. And one of these opportunities is the grant that's before you tonight. I guess the purpose of this grant, the objective is essentially to highlight these big picture ideas in the realm of sustainability and translating that into practical programming, specific policy recommendations that each of our 12, 13 communities can utilize. And as part of kind of focusing the scope of this project, we focused on two specific areas, one being an energy navigator program, really focusing on financial incentives funded through federal programming that can kind of be handed down to individual property owners for energy improvements to their home. If it's energy efficient appliances, if it's heat pumps, some other examples I include in the packet. And then the other project focus being making more multifamily development sustainable. If it's new development, if it's adaptive reuse of an existing building, if it's just a renovation of an existing multifamily complex. So trying to find some specific solutions that can really bring the overall cost down, hopefully. So with that, I mentioned in the packet there is not a financial cost. There's no local match requirement. However, consistent with other grant opportunities, we still have this be brought before the committee for approval.
Okay. So we'd be looking for a motion to authorize them to apply for the Energy Future Grant.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Morrow,
Second.
second by Shore. Comments from the committee? Comments from the public?
Sam Lang, Alder for District 9. I'd just like to say I'm very excited to see this sort of thing going on in our community. This is exactly what I wanted to see our city staff working on here in this summer. So thank you very much for your work on this.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, we'll take a vote. Those of you in favor of authorization of that energy, applying for the Energy Future Grant, would signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed would be no. And that passes. Finally, we have a couple yet. Approval for purchase of an unaddressed parcel adjacent to Jefferson Street in LaSalle. Who's speaking to that?
I can, yeah. So I know this committee has discussed this in closed session last month, but essentially the purpose of this proposed purchase is to construct additional housing within the far east side of town, directly southeast of the former Cops and Walmart redevelopment site. This was brought before our Plan Commission last week, Thursday, and they did recommend approval, and then consistent with state stats, would have to go before this body and then ultimately council next week for approval.
Okay. Motion would be in order?
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Alder Shuda. With the motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alder Moore. Comments from the committee?
I think it's great that, we can kind of see how the plan's kind of coming together with this. It already has the water and sewer access points and so on, so there's not going to be a lot of extra costs with that. So, so the folks who are the parcels that are going to be built, they're going to have city services and not have that extra cost that's going to be coming into their lots. So it's nice.
Agreed. Alder Shore.
Thank you, Chair. And our recent discussion of the car wash was a reminder of the advantages of owning and having that control over the development, rather than the constraints of not owning and having to take what the market delivers.
True. Comments from the public? All right, hearing none, we'll vote on the approval and purchase of that unaddressed parcel adjacent to Jefferson Street in LaSalle. All those in favor would signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed would be no. And that purchase is approved.
I move approval of the
Well,
claims paid.
I was just going to say, we are approving it at this level. It'll be going to council next week. Finally, we do have approval of claims paid. That's, all those claims are in your packet. Any questions?
I already moved it.
Moved?
Second.
Moved by Shore, second by Shuda. All in favor would be signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed would be no. That obviously is approved as well.
And we are adjourned.
We are adjourned at 7:33.